What if the most important decision of your life only lasted 10 minutes? He was just a struggling single father, tired, overworked, trying to hold it all together for the sake of his little boy. She was a woman passing through town with no intention of staying and even less reason to get involved. But then something happened. Something so small, so ordinary, it should have gone unnoticed. He asked her to watch his son for just 10 minutes. And those 10 minutes, they changed all of their lives forever. This is a story about unexpected kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't just arrive, it grows. If you believe in the quiet miracles of everyday life and the beauty of found family, you're in the right place. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of our heartwarming, true-to-life stories. Now, let's begin. A struggling single dad let a woman watch his son. She came back a billionaire begging to be mom. It was the kind of October morning that made the trees look like they were on fire, golden, rust red, and clinging to the last of their leaves. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, the kind of scent that made you pause and breathe just a little deeper. Ethan Moore stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the auto garage he rented by the month, watching his 6-year-old son chase a wayward leaf down the curb. Jamie's laugh was small and breathy, the sound of a boy who didn't get to play often but cherished it when he did. "Stay where I can see you, bud," Ethan called. Jamie skidded to a stop, saluted with the kind of theatrical seriousness only 6-year-olds can pull off, then returned to the worn wooden bench outside the garage. He climbed up beside his battered Batman backpack and picked up the book he'd been leafing through, a dog-eared copy of Where the Sidewalk Ends that Ethan had bought for $1 at a thrift store. Ethan checked his phone. 9:42 a.m., a rare lull. No customers yet, no calls. Just the kind of quiet morning that almost felt suspicious. That's when the smoke alarm from the old gas station across the road began to scream. Ethan's head snapped up. Across the street, thin white smoke curled out from under the hood of a dusty Jeep Cherokee, parked dangerously close to the pump. A woman stood outside the vehicle, flapping her arms uselessly, screaming something Ethan couldn't hear over the blaring. Without thinking, he dropped the wrench in his hand and sprinted across the road, then stopped. Jamie. He looked back. His son was staring at him, eyes wide. Ethan turned in a slow circle, and then he saw her, a woman sitting alone at the nearby picnic table just outside the cafe next to his garage, wrapped in a gray cashmere scarf, nursing a to-go cup. "Ma'am," he shouted, already moving, "could you, please, can you watch my son for just 10 minutes? She blinked, startled. Her eyes were the first thing he noticed. Calm, unusually steady. Ethan knelt in front of Jamie, hands on the boy's shoulders. "Jamie, stay right here. This lady will keep an eye on you. I need to go help that woman, okay?" Jamie nodded slowly. "Will she read me a story?" Ethan gave a short laugh, ruffled his son's hair, and ran. The woman in the scarf looked at Jamie, then at the flaming Jeep, then at the father disappearing into smoke. She stood, walked over slowly, and sat beside the boy on the bench. Her movements were measured, gentle. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jamie. What's yours?" She smiled. "Isabel. Are you a mom?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Isabel paused, then looked away toward the smoke. "No," she said softly. "Not anymore." Jamie didn't seem to notice. "Want to read this with me?" Isabel took the book from his hands. Her nails were neat, her fingers long and elegant, the kind of hands that had never changed oil. But she opened the book and began to read. "There is a place where the sidewalk ends, and before the street begins." Across the street, Ethan reached the smoking car. The woman had already backed away, clutching a toddler to her chest. No time for hesitation. He grabbed the emergency extinguisher from the garage, popped the hood, and doused the engine, cursing under his breath as heat singed his knuckles. Someone had called 911. He could hear the sirens now, faint but coming. By the time the fire crew arrived, the smoke had thinned and the real danger had passed. The woman thanked him in a flurry of panic and gratitude. Ethan brushed it off, already looking back toward the bench. Jamie was laughing. He was laughing. And Isabel, this stranger with the elegant scarf and unreadable eyes, was laughing too, holding the book open between them like a secret shared. Ethan jogged back across the road, breathing hard, soot smudged on his neck. "I'm so sorry to bother you. Thank you. I didn't know what else to do," he said, bending to check Jamie's face, his hands brushing his cheek like he couldn't believe he was still whole. Isabel stood, handing the book back. "No bother. He's a lovely child." Ethan looked at her. For the first time, really looked. She was beautiful in a way that didn't call attention to itself. Mid-30s, maybe. No wedding ring. Her clothes were simple but expensive. The coat was cashmere, the boots Italian leather. Something didn't fit. "Are you passing through?" he asked. "I suppose," she said, "but I might stay a while." Ethan tilted his head. "People don't usually vacation in Pine Hollow." "I'm not most people," she replied with a half smile. Before he could ask more, Jamie tugged his sleeve. "Dad, she reads better than you." "Is that so?" Ethan grinned. "You trying to replace me already?" Jamie shrugged, unconcerned. Isabel laughed again, quieter this time. "He's a lucky boy." Ethan looked down at his son. "No, I'm the lucky one." They stood in silence for a beat too long. Then Isabel touched the edge of her scarf, nodded politely, and walked back toward the cafe. Ethan watched her go, the soft click of her boots fading on the sidewalk. 10 minutes, that was all. Just 10 minutes. But sometimes 10 minutes is all it takes for a life to change. 3 days passed before Ethan saw her again. He'd told himself he wasn't looking. But the truth was, each time the bell over the garage door jingled, he glanced up hoping it was her. He didn't even know why. Maybe it was because she'd read to Jamie so effortlessly. Or maybe because in 10 chaotic minutes, she'd managed to seem more composed than most people he'd known in 10 years. But she hadn't come back. Until Tuesday. It was late morning when the familiar soft hum of expensive tires rolled into the gravel lot. Not the typical squeak of aging pickup trucks or dented sedans that usually stop by for oil changes. This was smooth, polished. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out of the bay. The woman with the gray scarf was stepping out of a sleek black SUV, her hair caught in the wind like something from a magazine cover. She wore jeans this time, still designer he guessed, and a soft cream sweater beneath a quilted vest. Her boots were dusted with dry leaves. Jamie, sitting cross-legged on the shop floor with a bucket of Matchbox cars, looked up and beamed. "Miss Isabel," he called. Isabel smiled, her entire face changing with the gesture. "Hey there, Jamie." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Car trouble?" "Not yet," she said, "but I thought I'd come by and see if you do house calls." He blinked. "You're having car trouble at a house. You don't live in yet?" Isabel grinned, the kind that made people lower their guard. "Fine, you got me. I'm renting a place for a few weeks, just outside town. It's old, has quirks." "Leaky roof?" Ethan guessed. "Loose porch light, creaky steps, and a boiler that sounds like it's chewing on screws." She tilted her head. "You strike me as someone who knows his way around more than just engines." He hesitated, still gripping the rag in his hand. "I do some handyman work, when I have time." "Perfect," she said. "I was going to ask the local listing board, but Jamie already vouched for you." Ethan looked at his son, who had resumed driving two cars into each other in slow-motion crashes. "You sure you want a mechanic with soot-stained fingernails fixing your front porch?" he asked. "I trust people who work with their hands," Isabel replied. "They tend to say what they mean." Her words struck deeper than he expected. "All right," Ethan said. "I'll swing by this afternoon after I close up." She handed him a slip of paper. Her handwriting was precise, like someone who rarely made mistakes. "I didn't catch your last name," he said, reading the address. "Ward," she replied smoothly. "Isabel Ward." Something about the way she said it made it sound both familiar and off-limits. Her rental house was tucked behind a line of oaks on a quiet road leading out of town. It looked like it hadn't been lived in full-time for years. The front steps sagged, the mailbox leaned, and the ivy climbing the porch railings had turned golden with the season. Isabel was waiting on the porch when Ethan pulled up in his truck, toolbox in hand. "I made tea," she said. "Hope that's acceptable contractor fare." Ethan chuckled. "If it's hot and not out of a gas station pot, I'm in." She led him inside. The house was sparsely furnished, clearly a rental, but clean and sunlit, with wide windows that overlooked a field lined with pine trees. A fireplace stood cold but intact in the corner. There were no personal photos, no signs of a life fully unpacked. They sat at the old wooden kitchen table. The tea was strong, fragrant, and oddly comforting. "So," Ethan said, sipping, "why Pine Hollow?" Isabel tapped her mug. "I wanted a town where no one knew my name. And yet you introduced yourself." She smiled. "You were in the middle of saving a Jeep from exploding. I figured real names were appropriate." He tilted his head. "Running from something?" "Running towards something, I hope," she replied. "But I suppose the line's blurry these days." Ethan didn't push. He knew what it meant to have parts of your past you didn't invite into every conversation. Besides, the way she said it, soft, almost wistful, told him it wasn't casual. He spent the next 2 hours fixing the porch steps, replacing 2 cracked boards, tightening the railing, and rewiring the motion light. Isabel watched from the top step, cross-legged with a notepad in hand. "You don't talk much when you work," she said after a while. "I figure if I talk too much, I'll miss what needs doing." "I like that," she said. "Quiet men make the loudest difference." He looked up, caught her gaze, and for a moment, the air felt charged with something neither of them dared name. As the sun lowered, casting amber light across the porch, Ethan packed up his tools. Isabel handed him a folded check. He waved it away. "It was barely a half day." "Then take it for the tea and the company," she said, "and consider it a retainer for fixing whatever else breaks next." He hesitated, then took it without unfolding. "You always this generous with strangers?" "Only the ones who run toward fires," she said and smiled. Before she turned inside, Jamie's name slipped from her lips, almost like a prayer. "He's a good kid," she said. "The kind of good that comes from love." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "He misses his mom?" she asked gently. "Every day," he said. "But I think he misses the idea of her more now. The warmth, the softness. I do what I can. But I'm a man with calloused hands." "Sometimes," Isabel said, stepping inside, "those are the best kind." And then the door closed softly behind her. The next time Isabel came to the garage, it was with a pie in one hand and a quiet question on her lips. "Is Jamie around?" Ethan looked up from beneath the hood of a '92 Ford and nodded toward the back office. "He's in there, drawing spaceships and asking the big questions." She smiled, smoothing her scarf. This one burgundy, soft and thick. Her eyes flicked toward the window behind Ethan. "Mind if I join him?" Ethan shrugged. He'd like that. So she did. She found Jamie on the worn couch, surrounded by colored pencils and a stack of paper that seemed to grow with each visit. He looked up and grinned. "Did you bring another book?" "I brought pie," she said. "Think that buys me a story?" Jamie nodded gravely, as if confirming a contract. They sat together, sharing forkfuls of apple pie, while Jamie told her about a spaceship powered by kindness and peanut butter sandwiches. Isabel listened intently, laughing in all the right places, her heart pulling tighter with each detail. She hadn't realized how quickly affection could grow, how one child's small hands and open heart could begin to sew something whole into a place inside her that had been threadbare for years. When Ethan stepped into the office 20 minutes later, it was to the sight of Jamie snuggled against Isabel's side, fast asleep, and her fingers gently stroking his hair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat, and she looked up, not startled, just soft. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quietly. "You didn't." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "He doesn't do that often, not even with my sister. He trusts easy." "He doesn't actually," Ethan said. "He just trusts you." That gave her pause. Ethan crossed the room and lifted Jamie in his arms. The boy stirred, curled into his father's chest, and sighed. As Ethan laid him down in the small cot in the back, Isabel bent to gather the scattered crayons. And that's when she saw it, a folded piece of red construction paper tucked inside a worn notebook. Curious, she slid it loose. The words scrawled across the front in a child's hand read, "Letter to Santa." She didn't mean to open it, but the corner was already unsealed, and something about the way it fluttered open made her breath catch. "Dear Santa, I know you are busy and might not come to our town, but I hope you do. I only want one thing. Can you bring my dad someone who gives good hugs? I miss hugs. I miss soft voices. I miss stories before bed. I'm not asking for a real mom, just someone who stays. Thank you, Jamie. Isabel stood still for a long time, the paper trembling in her hand. It wasn't just what the letter said, it was what it didn't say. The loneliness between the lines, the careful way Jamie tried to make his wish sound smaller than it was, so it might seem easier to grant. She folded it back just as Ethan returned. Everything okay? He asked. She nodded a little too fast. I should go. Pie was a hit, Ethan said, his voice quiet. I'm glad, she whispered. Then she turned and walked out into the golden afternoon, heart beating harder than it had in years. That night, she sat at the kitchen table of the rental house with a letter in her mind and a pen in her hand. Her journal, the one she hadn't opened in nearly a decade, lay before her, its leather cover stiff with time. She opened to a blank page and wrote, Today I read a letter not meant for me, and it broke something open inside I thought was long gone. It reminded me that I used to dream of little voices in the hallway and socks left on the stairs. It reminded me of what I lost. But more than that, it reminded me of what's still possible. I don't know if I'm brave enough, but I want to be. She closed the book, laid her pen down, and for the first time in years, wept without shame. The next morning, she returned to the garage with cinnamon rolls because Pie had felt too forward. Ethan was already outside, tuning the engine of a classic Chevy. You didn't have to bring anything, he said, but smiled when he took one. Isabel sat on the tailgate beside him. Can I ask you something? He wiped his hands. Sure. Why didn't you date after Jamie's mom passed? He didn't answer right away. Then, because I was afraid I'd mess him up more than life already had. Warren right, she nodded slowly. You think having someone new would confuse him? No. Ethan looked down at the cinnamon roll. I think it would confuse me. Isabel tilted her head. You seem pretty clear-headed to me. He chuckled. Only on carb-heavy mornings. She smiled, then grew quiet. I read something yesterday. A letter. Jamie wrote it to Santa. Ethan's expression shifted. I wasn't snooping, she added quickly. It slipped out of his notebook. He nodded, exhaling. I found it a few weeks ago. Never said anything. What do you say to something like that? I don't know, Isabel said softly. But I do know what it feels like to wish for something you think you'll never have. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not attraction, not yet, but understanding, recognition, a quiet ache they both carried. I don't want to overstep, she continued, but if you ever need someone to read him a bedtime story again, I'd be honored. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and whatever guarded place inside him had kept the world at arm's length, flickered. Miss Isabel, came a voice from behind them. Jamie, still in pajamas, holding a stuffed dinosaur, stood in the doorway. Did you come to stay? Isabel's breath caught. Ethan watched her carefully. She crouched down, looked Jamie right in the eyes and said, Not yet, but I came to try. The garage was unusually quiet for a Saturday. A steady drizzle fell outside, softening the sounds of the world, like nature had turned down its own volume knob. Ethan stood beneath the raised hood of a pickup, but his hands moved slower than usual. His mind wasn't on spark plugs or belts. It was on the woman who'd started showing up like clockwork. Not with fanfare, not with drama, just presence. Isabel had brought blueberry muffins that morning. Jamie had declared her the queen of breakfast. Ethan hadn't disagreed. Now, a few hours later, she was sitting on a stool near the open garage door, legs crossed, watching the rain while Jamie lined up his Matchbox cars by color and assigned each one a superhero name. I think Thor would drive the red one, Jamie declared. Isabel didn't argue. Ethan finally wiped his hands on a shop towel and came to lean beside her. You ever get bored sitting here? She shook her head. Not once. Even when the most exciting thing happening is a 6-year-old deciding which car is strong enough to carry a dinosaur? Especially then, she said, smiling. Jamie ran out into the drizzle before either of them could stop him, giggling as he splashed through a puddle in his rain boots. Isabel stepped forward as if to follow, but Ethan touched her arm gently. He needs this, he said. Most kids get recess. He gets 15 minutes between carburetor work. She paused, then nodded, watching Jamie twirl in the light rain. "He's happy," she said. "I try to keep it that way." Isabel glanced at Ethan. "You're doing more than trying." He didn't reply, but the faintest curve of a smile tugged at his mouth. Later that afternoon, Jamie tugged Isabel's sleeve. "Can we show her the garden, Dad?" Ethan hesitated. "It's just a patch of tomatoes and weeds." "But the tomatoes are huge now." Isabel stood. "I'd love to see them." They crossed behind the garage to a fenced-in corner of the lot, where a small, struggling garden lay against the backdrop of a crumbling brick wall. The tomatoes were, in fact, enormous, red and heavy on the vine. Jamie darted forward and plucked one, holding it up like a trophy. "Best one yet," he said proudly. Isabel bent down to examine a vine. "You grow these?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Started after my wife passed. I needed something that didn't break when I touched it." She looked at him gently. "You think these didn't break a little too?" He chuckled softly. "They did, especially the first year." Jamie was now talking animatedly to the tomato in his hands, explaining that it would soon become sauce and that he was very sorry in advance. Isabel crouched down beside another plant, brushing dirt off the base. "Did she garden? Your wife?" Ethan nodded. "Loved it. She said growing things helped her feel like she was part of something bigger, like life kept going, even if parts of it didn't." Isabel traced a fingertip across a leaf. "Sounds like someone I would have liked." "Uh-huh. You would have," Ethan said quietly. A moment passed in silence. Then Jamie bounded over. "Can we make tomato soup tonight?" "I thought you wanted spaghetti," Ethan said. "We can do both," Jamie reasoned, completely convinced this was the most logical answer. Isabel smiled. "Well, in that case, I'd better earn my dinner." "You already did," Jamie said. "You stayed." Ethan's gaze met Isabel's. There was no need to explain how deeply those two words had just struck her. That evening, the three of them stood in Ethan's small kitchen, elbows bumping and laughter spilling like flour across the counter. Isabel wore an apron Ethan found in a drawer, a relic of his wife's, faded but still intact. She didn't comment on it, but her hands moved with care. "Jamie, no, don't dump the salt, sprinkle it," Ethan said, trying to wrest control of the spice jar. Jamie giggled and sneezed. "I think it went in my nose," Ethan groaned. Isabel laughed. The soup simmered. The spaghetti bubbled. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic and something else. Something that had been missing for a long time. Not a scent. A presence. Isabel set the table while Ethan drained the pasta. Jamie added a folded paper napkin beside each plate, with little stick figures drawn in the corners. "This one's me," he said, pointing. "And this is Dad. And this—" He paused, looking at Isabel. "This is you." She bent to examine the figure. "I gave you a cape," he added. Isabel smiled so softly it barely reached her lips, but her eyes shone. They ate together like it was normal, like it had always been this way, as if three broken people had simply found each other and through some unspoken agreement decided to be less broken together. After dinner, Jamie yawned and curled up on the couch with a blanket. Ethan reached for a book, but Jamie shook his head. "I want her to read tonight." Isabel blinked. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "You do the voices better." Ethan handed her Goodnight Moon, and she opened it slowly, like holding something sacred. As she read, Jamie's eyes drifted shut, his breathing even. She tucked the blanket around him when she finished, then looked at Ethan. "He always falls asleep like that?" "Only when he feels safe." He didn't say it for effect. He said it like it was fact, and it was. Isabel turned back to the sleeping boy, then to the man who watched over him like a silent guardian. She thought about the things she had lost, the child she never held, the years she gave to people who didn't stay, and then she thought about Jamie's drawing, about the cape, about the garden that kept growing, even after it broke. Ethan had never been one for sentimental gestures, but the wall in his hallway betrayed him. It wasn't planned. It had started with one photo, Jamie's ultrasound, thumb-sized and blurry. Then came a hospital bracelet, a Polaroid of his wife, Maddie, half laughing and half exhausted, holding their newborn like she'd just been handed the moon. After she passed, he couldn't bring himself to take them down. So instead, he kept adding. Over time, the wall grew into a collage of love and loss. Photos of Jamie's first steps, a crayon drawing of their family with Maddie floating above them like a smiling angel, a sticky note in her handwriting that read, "Don't forget your heart, E." Ethan never told anyone about it, but that evening Isabel saw it. She'd come by unannounced just after sunset, carrying a mason jar filled with tulips. "I found these at the weekend market," she said, cheeks pink from the chill. "Thought Jamie might like them." "He's already asleep," Ethan said, holding the door open. "But I think he'd approve." She stepped inside, warmth from the old radiator wrapping around her. Ethan reached for a glass vase in the cupboard, motioned for her to follow him to the hall closet, where, unintentionally, she passed the wall, and stopped. She said nothing at first, just studied it, hand over her mouth. Ethan froze beside her, holding the empty vase like it was a shield. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't snooping," she murmured. "You're not," he said. A long silence hung between them, filled only by the soft ticking of a nearby clock. "She looks kind," Isabel finally said, her eyes on a picture of Maddie kneeling in a garden, sunlight in her hair. "She was," Ethan said. "Too kind for someone like me." "Don't say that." "It's true," he said, voice low. "She believed people could change, that they were all good at the core. I've seen enough to know that's not always the case." Isabel turned to him. "And yet you ran toward a burning car for someone you didn't know." Ethan looked away. She reached for a photo, her fingers hovering but not touching. "What happened?" He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "She was diagnosed a week after Jamie turned 3. We thought it was just fatigue. Turned out it was aggressive, rare. 6 months later, she was gone." Isabel's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. "I wasn't there," he added. "Not when she died. I was fixing someone's water heater. She called me and said, 'Take your time. I'm just tired.'" Isabel stepped closer. "Ethan, I should have known," he said, his voice catching. "I should have gone home." She shook her head. "You loved her. That's what matters. Loving someone doesn't always mean being enough." A long silence. Then Isabel softly, "She'd be proud of you." That made him blink. "Why?" "Because you didn't close the door. You kept this," she said, gesturing to the wall. "And you kept Jamie safe. And you still let yourself hope, whether you admit it or not." Ethan looked at her like she'd peeled something back in him he didn't know was still raw. "I haven't let anyone in since," he said. "Not really." "I haven't either," she replied. They stood in front of that wall for what felt like an entire season. No one reached for anyone. But the air between them changed, thickened with something more than grief, a mutual reverence, a quiet recognition of pain and the strength it took to carry it every day. Later they sat at the kitchen table, the tulips now arranged in the vase, blooming against the window like little defiant flames. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one toward her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Isabel nodded. "Why are you really here?" The question didn't come with suspicion. It was gentle, careful. Isabel looked down at her cup. "I needed to disappear," she said, "and I needed to see if I could still feel." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Feel what?" "Hope, joy, the ache that comes with belonging to something again." He didn't press, just listened. "I lost a child," she said after a moment. 10 years ago, a car accident. I wasn't even showing yet, but I had names picked out, a nursery half painted. It's funny how your whole life can live in a heartbeat you never get to hear." Ethan stared at her, heart hammering. "I'm sorry," he said. "I am too," she whispered. "I thought I had buried it, but Jamie, he brings it all back. And not in a painful way, in a, maybe there's still a place for it way." Ethan said nothing, but the corner of his mouth turned slightly like a storm cloud passing. Isabel set her mug down. "I know I'm not part of your world. Not really. But I want to be, if you'll let me." That word. Let. He wasn't used to anyone asking permission to stay. People just left or didn't. But here was someone offering herself, not with expectations, but with hope. He nodded slowly. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," she said. "But I think we can figure it out." They sat in silence after that, listening to the heater creak and the world settle. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan felt something shift inside him, like a door he hadn't realized was locked had just opened a crack. In Pine Hollow, gossip traveled faster than weather, and just as unpredictably. The week after Isabel began appearing more regularly at the garage, the questions began. Quiet at first, whispered over fresh coffee in the town diner, exchanged between grocery store aisles where pickles met produce. "Who's the woman with the scarf?" "She drives that black Range Rover, right? I heard she paid double at the farmer's market, in cash." And then came the moment Ethan couldn't ignore. He was at Miller's Hardware, picking up a replacement part for a furnace he'd promised to fix. Old man Fletcher, who'd run the store since Reagan was president, leaned across the counter with a knowing smile. "You got yourself a real mystery, Ethan," he said, sliding over the receipt. Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Fletcher scratched his beard. "Friend of mine saw her in a Forbes article. Said she looks a lot like Isabel Ward." Ethan blinked. "Who?" Fletcher squinted. "You don't read Forbes, do you?" "Not since I stopped needing to know what yachts cost," Ethan muttered. Fletcher chuckled. "Ward Financial, big shot in Manhattan. Disappeared after some ugly engagement fallout. She had a face on billboards a couple years back." Ethan stared at the receipt in his hand like it might provide an answer. Then he walked out without saying goodbye. Back at the garage, the Range Rover was already parked in the usual spot. Isabel stood just inside the bay, her scarf tucked into a navy peacoat. She held 2 cups of coffee in a brown paper bag that likely contained something Ethan didn't deserve anymore. Jamie was laughing somewhere in the back, narrating a battle between a Tyrannosaurus and a fire truck. Ethan stepped inside, letting the screen door bang behind him. "Hey," Isabel said, lighting up. "I brought Isabel Ward," he cut in, voice low but hard-edged. "That your real name?" Her smile faltered. The coffee in her hands trembled just slightly. "Yes." "And the billions? The boardroom? The Manhattan penthouse?" She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "All of it." Ethan let out a sharp breath, somewhere between disbelief and betrayal. "You lied." "I didn't lie," she said calmly. "I just didn't tell you." "Hamai," he stepped back as if her presence had become radioactive. "You let my kid fall asleep in your lap. You read him bedtime stories. And all the while you were, what, playing tourist in the poor part of town?" Her jaw tensed. "That's not fair." "No," he snapped, "because it sure feels like you chose to drop into our lives like we were some kind of detour." Isabel's voice dropped, but the hurt in it sharpened. "You think this was a game for me?" Ethan folded his arms. "Wasn't it? I came here to disappear," she said, her voice catching, "to be someone who wasn't constantly measured by money or headlines. And then I met you, met him, and it stopped being about hiding." He looked away, swallowing hard. "Do you know what it feels like," she said, "to be judged every day for something you never even wanted? I didn't ask for wealth. I didn't chase it. I inherited it and survived it and lost people because of it." Ethan's voice dropped. "Then why not just tell me?" "Because I liked the way you looked at me when you didn't know." Those words landed with weight. Silence ballooned between them. Ethan stepped past her, toward the office, like he needed to move before the walls closed in. But just before he vanished around the corner, he turned. "I trusted you." Isabel flinched. "I let you into the only world I have left, and now I don't know what was real and what was charity." And with that, he was gone. She didn't see him for 3 days. Not at the garage, not at the market, not even on the porch where Jamie used to wave at squirrels and drag her into make-believe pirate battles. She had never felt so visible and invisible all at once. The whispers grew louder. Someone posted a grainy photo of her Range Rover online, tagged "Haksh, Rich Lady in Hollow." The town she'd chosen for its anonymity was shrinking around her like a noose. On the 4th day, she sat at the rental's dining room table with her hands clasped, staring at the envelope in front of her, a letter addressed to Ethan, handwritten on cream stationery she hadn't used in years. She hadn't sent it yet. Instead, she drove. Back to the garage. Back to the place where she'd first been someone else. Someone smaller. Someone honest. She found the bay door half open and Ethan inside, hunched over an engine like the world didn't exist beyond nuts and bolts. He didn't look up. "I'm not here to beg," she said. He kept working. "But I am here to apologize." Silence. I should have told you who I was, not because you deserved the drama, but because you deserved the truth. Still no response. I wasn't playing a role. I was trying to live one I forgot I could have. Ethan finally stood, turned. His eyes were tired, guarded. I don't care how much money you have, Isabel. She blinked. I care that you didn't trust me with the truth. He tossed a rag into a bucket. The sound was louder than it should have been. I don't let people in, he said. Not because I'm noble, because I'm scared. Because every time I did, something broke. And you were starting to feel like the thing that wouldn't. Her breath caught. But now I don't know. I'm still me, she said. Are you? He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like a man staring at a puzzle missing one piece. I want to be, she whispered. But you have to let me prove it. Ethan looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Jamie deserves that. And what about you? He paused. I don't know yet. The silence in the house felt heavier now. Jamie still asked about her, not with the urgency of a child missing his favorite toy, but with the solemn weight of someone realizing something good might not come back. Is she mad at us? He asked one evening, while poking listlessly at his macaroni. No, buddy, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. Sometimes grown-ups just need space to figure things out. Jamie didn't answer. He just nodded, like he'd already started learning that the world was full of goodbyes that didn't come with reasons. Later that night, after Jamie fell asleep with Goodnight Moon pressed to his chest and the porch light humming softly outside, Ethan found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He opened the envelope she'd left behind. It wasn't sealed, just resting on the corner of the table, like an apology too fragile to close. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn at the corners, smelling faintly of lavender and ink. There was a note folded neatly on top. Ethan, I didn't know how to say everything that needed to be said. Maybe these pages will say it for me. You asked who I really was. This is me. Isabel. He turned the first page, then another, and another. She had written to no one, or maybe to the version of herself she no longer recognized. The entries spanned years, but they weren't diary notes. They were letters, unsent, unspoken, unfinished. To the child I never held, I think about you every day. Your name changes depending on the weather. Sometimes I call you Lily, sometimes James, sometimes just Little One. I wonder if you would have loved books. I wonder if you would have had your father's crooked smile or my laugh that always arrived a second too late. I wonder if you would have saved me. Ethan felt the breath leave his body. He kept reading. To the man I almost married, you taught me how easy it is to be wanted for all the wrong reasons. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the heartbreak. It led me to the silence where I finally heard myself again. To the world, I am tired of being a dollar sign with good shoes. I am tired of being admired and not known. I want someone to see the part of me that still makes her own tea and cries at old movies. I want to matter to someone who doesn't know my resume. I want to be chosen, not for what I can give, but for who I am when no one is looking. By the time Ethan closed the book, dawn was edging over the hills, and light streaked across the garage roof in soft gold bands. He sat at the kitchen table, the journal in front of him, and felt something shift. He'd built walls, and she had too. But hers weren't made of suspicion, they were made of sorrow. He didn't see her for another 2 days. But when he did, it wasn't at the garage. It was at the garden. He hadn't expected her. He was weeding alone, the soil warm beneath his knees, the tomato vines overgrown and wild. She came through the back gate quietly, hands in her coat pockets, a paper bag tucked beneath one arm. I brought muffins, she said. Ethan stood slowly, brushing dirt from his jeans. Jamie's inside, she nodded. I'll wait. He hesitated, then said, I read it. Isabel looked down. I hoped you would. You wrote like someone who forgot people could still listen. She smiled faintly. I did forget. They stood between rows of green, the late sun laying long shadows on the earth. You asked if I still saw you, Ethan said. And I do. Her eyes shimmered. I see someone brave enough to stay when she's afraid. Someone who's lived in noise so long, she mistook silence for punishment. Someone who could have run, but didn't. Isabel swallowed hard. I'm still figuring out who I am outside the headlines. Ethan nodded. Me too. Just in a different way. She stepped closer. I meant what I wrote, about wanting to belong somewhere again. Ethan met her eyes, his voice rough. Then come back in, even if we're both still figuring it out. She nodded, and the quiet between them was no longer silence. It was space, room for something to grow. That evening, Jamie stood on the porch when he saw her approach again. A different scarf this time. Sunflower yellow, like she was trying to believe in something. He ran to her before she'd fully reached the steps and threw his arms around her waist. You came back! She bent and held him tightly. Of course I did. Dad said you needed thinking time. Did it work? Isabel laughed gently. It did. I missed you. I saved you a drawing, he said proudly. It's us, and a garden, and a rocket ship. That's exactly what I needed. He pulled her inside like he didn't need permission anymore. And for the first time, Isabel didn't feel like a guest. She felt like someone returning home. The storm rolled in without apology. Dark clouds gathered over Pine Hollow like a curtain being drawn across the sky. The wind came first, whipping leaves into spirals and rattling windows with impatient fingers. Then thunder, low and grumbling, like a distant warning. By dusk, rain had begun to fall in sharp vertical lines, relentless and cold. Ethan stood on the back porch, his hand wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. From the overhang, he watched water slide down the gutters and pool in the driveway. Jamie was inside reading aloud to his dinosaurs from a comic book, and Isabel was gone again. Not permanently, he told himself that, but just long enough to make the house feel too quiet. She'd gone to the rental cottage that morning to pack a few things, saying she needed time to recenter before staying longer. She hadn't said when she'd be back. Ethan hated how easily that silence turned into fear. He was just about to go inside when the first bolt of lightning hit. It wasn't a clean strike. It came with a sound like a tree cracking from the inside out, followed by a sudden, unmistakable pop from behind the garage. Then darkness. The porch light flickered once, twice, then died. Damn, Ethan muttered, already setting his mug down. Dad? Jamie called from inside. I got it, buddy. Just the breaker. But it wasn't the breaker. When Ethan stepped out into the storm, flashlight in hand, he followed the smell of something acrid. Electrical. And then he saw it, a small fire smoldering along the edge of the garage roof, where the lightning had apparently struck the metal gutter, which arced into the electrical box. A section of the roof had begun to burn. Damn it, he cursed and turned on his heel. He ran back into the house, soaked to the bone in seconds. Jamie, stay inside. Stay here, he said, pulling on his coat, already grabbing the fire extinguisher from the pantry. Don't come out, no matter what. The boy nodded, wide-eyed but calm. Ethan could see he wanted to be brave. Outside, the wind nearly ripped the door off its hinges. Ethan fought his way back to the garage and aimed the extinguisher upward. Foam hissed and surged, smothering the flames before they could leap to the main house. His arms burned with the effort, his vision blurred from rain and smoke, but he didn't stop until the last glow had turned to black. Only then did he drop to his knees, panting. The wind howled through the trees, and headlights sliced through the storm. Isabel's SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of the drive. She leapt out without an umbrella, her coat already soaked, eyes scanning until they locked on him. Ethan! He looked up, blinking through rain. Welcome back. She knelt beside him, breathless. I saw the flames from the road. He managed a dry smile. You always have impeccable timing. You're bleeding, she said, reaching for his hand. It's nothing. Just scraped it on the ladder. Isabel ignored his protest, pulling a clean cloth from her coat pocket. How did she always have something useful? And pressed it gently to his hand, then softer. You shouldn't have been out here alone. He exhaled. Wasn't planning on an electrical fire today. They looked up at the blackened edge of the garage. The storm was still raging, but something between them had stilled. I should have come back sooner, she said. I should have told someone the garage wiring needed updating 3 years ago, he replied. They both smiled barely. Inside the house, Jamie peeked out the window and waved wildly. Isabel waved back. I missed that, she murmured. Ethan studied her face. Wet hair, damp scarf, eyes as unguarded as he'd ever seen them. You came back, he said. I never really left. He let the words settle. Come inside, he said. We've got soup and towels and a kid who asks about you every morning. She followed him in. Inside, Jamie flung himself at her waist, wrapping small arms around her like she'd been gone a lifetime. I saved you a seat, he said. Right next to me. I wouldn't sit anywhere else, she replied. They dried off, changed clothes, and gathered in the living room with the last of the candles glowing faintly on the mantel. The power hadn't returned, but the house was warm, stubbornly so, filled with blankets and laughter, and the kind of light you couldn't plug in. They sipped soup from mismatched mugs. Jamie leaned sleepily against Isabel's shoulder as Ethan tossed another log on the fire. Dad says you're staying for a while, Jamie said, half mumbled. Ethan and Isabel shared a look over the flickering flames. That okay with you? She asked. Jamie nodded. Can you stay forever? Isabel paused, her eyes welling. Ethan stepped in. Let's start with a few weeks, bud. Jamie grinned. Then we'll make her pancakes every Saturday. That's a pretty good contract, Isabel said. When Jamie finally fell asleep, curled on the couch, a blanket tucked under his chin, Ethan and Isabel sat in the silence that only deep comfort can bring. He looked at her, voice quiet. Why did you really come back tonight? She didn't hesitate. Because I was driving away and realized home wasn't the cottage. It wasn't the coast or the city or anywhere else. She looked down at Jamie, sleeping soundly. It's here, it's this. Ethan reached for her hand, not forcefully, not even entirely sure what it meant yet, just willing. And when she took it, neither of them let go. Outside, the storm began to break. And inside, beneath a rebuilt porch light and a scarred old roof, something far more lasting had begun to take hold. The cemetery lay just outside Pine Hollow, at the end of a narrow gravel road flanked by old oaks and crumbling stone walls. There were no manicured hedges or rows of imported roses, just wildflowers that grew between the headstones and the rustle of leaves that whispered in the breeze. Ethan had avoided coming here for months. He'd meant to go on Maddie's birthday, and then again on the anniversary of her passing. But both times life had gotten in the way. Or maybe grief had. That morning he stood on the porch holding 2 thermoses of coffee, one he handed to Isabel. She liked it with too much cream, he said quietly. Isabel took the cup, sensing this wasn't just an errand. You don't have to do this today. I do, he said with a certain stillness in his voice. And I don't want to go alone. So they drove in silence, the kind that didn't ache, just settled. Jamie had gone with Mrs. Whitaker, the retired teacher down the street who made waffles every Saturday and had a soft spot for stray cats and lonely boys. He waved from her front steps as they pulled away, oblivious to the weight in the truck. Ethan hadn't said much when they arrived. He parked beneath an old elm, reached behind the seat for a bundle of yellow mums wrapped in brown paper, and started walking. Isabel followed him between the stones, reading names she'd never known. When they reached the headstone, Ethan paused. The words etched into the granite were simple. Madeline Grace Moore, beloved wife and mother. She taught us how to love, even in goodbye. Ethan knelt and placed the flowers at the base. He was quiet for a long time. She hated silence, he said at last. Said it made her feel like she was being forgotten. Isabel stood beside him, still, reverent. I'd talk to her out loud sometimes, Ethan continued. Just random things. Grocery lists. Jamie's nightmares. What broke on the truck that week? He looked up at the stone. But I stopped coming, not because I forgot her, but because I didn't know what I was supposed to say anymore. Isabel crouched beside him. Maybe you're not supposed to say anything. Maybe just being here is enough. He turned to her. Would you mind giving me a minute? Of course, she said, rising. She stepped back, out of earshot, but not out of sight. Ethan stared at the grave. The leaves rustled gently overhead, casting dancing shadows across the grass. I know I've made mistakes, he whispered, and I know I've messed up more than I've made right. But I never stopped loving you. And I tried, God, I tried to give Jamie a good life. His voice faltered. I don't know what you'd say about Isabel, but I know what I hope you'd say. He exhaled. She makes the room warmer when she walks in. He sleeps better when she's here. And I think I do too. He placed a hand on the cold granite. If there's a way you still see us. Just know I'm trying." He stood slowly and turned toward Isabel. She hadn't moved, just watched him with the kind of patience that couldn't be taught. When he reached her, he said simply, "Thank you." They walked back to the truck without speaking, but when he opened her door and helped her in, his hand lingered at her elbow. Not possession, just connection. They didn't go home right away. Instead, they stopped at the town overlook, where a wooden bench faced the hills and the river beyond. It had been Maddie's favorite spot in autumn, where the world turned gold and orange and whispered that death wasn't the end of beauty. They sat side by side, coffee cooling between their hands. "Did you love her a lot?" Isabel asked gently. Ethan didn't flinch. "I did. Does it scare you that you might love again?" He looked out at the landscape. "Not as much as it scares me that I might not." Isabel didn't respond right away. Then, "I used to think grief and love were opposites, but maybe they're just two halves of the same ache." Ethan glanced at her. "And what do you think now?" "I think love is what remains when grief gets tired." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. They sat like that for a while, watching the leaves fall, hand in hand, saying nothing that needed translation. Later that evening, back at home, Jamie ran to greet them at the porch. "Did you find her?" he asked, not understanding the meaning, but sensing something sacred in the day. Ethan bent and scooped him up. "Yeah, bud, I think we did." Jamie looked puzzled. "But she's in heaven." Ethan smiled. "And maybe she left the porch light on for us." Jamie turned to Isabel. "Did you cry?" "A little," she admitted. "Dad cries when no one's looking," Jamie announced. Ethan groaned. "Thanks for outing me, pal." Jamie giggled and wriggled free, racing inside to report his day of waffles and cat drama. Ethan and Isabel lingered on the steps. "Was it too soon?" he asked. "No," Isabel said. "It was right on time." Ethan studied her. "He's already written you into his world, you know." She nodded. "He's written himself into mine, too." He paused. "Are we writing something real?" he asked. Isabel leaned against the porch post, her smile soft. "We're not just writing it, Ethan. We're living it." And in that moment, the past didn't feel like a weight anymore. It felt like the soil beneath a garden finally ready to bloom. Isabel hadn't opened her laptop in over a month. It sat like a forgotten relic in the corner of the rental's kitchen table, quietly collecting dust beside a stack of Jamie's artwork and a half-finished puzzle. But that morning, curiosity, or maybe fate, got the better of her. She lifted the lid and waited as it blinked to life, humming softly. Her inbox was flooded. Messages from board members. A handful from distant acquaintances she hadn't spoken to since she vanished. And one, flagged urgent, from Carla Hensley, her former chief of staff, and the closest thing she had left to family in the world of high-rises and quarterly returns. She clicked it. Subject: Return and Recovery. Isabel, we've handled the press as best we could. Public sympathy has shifted in your favor. The board wants to meet. They're ready to offer you the full reinstatement package. CEO title, control of assets, full creative autonomy. They say it's yours if you return to New York before the quarter ends. You'd be welcomed back as the visionary you always were. Think about it. Carla Isabel read it twice, then closed the laptop slowly, like it might bite her. Her heart raced, not with excitement, but with something more tangled, something that smelled like temptation but tasted like dust. She looked out the window. Across the road stood Ethan's garage, its roof patched with fresh shingles after the storm, the porch light already glowing despite the afternoon sun. Jamie was there too, drawing rockets on the sidewalk in blue chalk. She watched as he laughed at something Ethan said, his entire face lit up with joy. A vision of another life flickered into her mind. Conference rooms, catered lunches, red carpet galas where no one ever asked how she felt, only what she owned. And yet here, this boy had handed her a crayon and a seat beside him on the porch, like it was the greatest gift he could offer. Her fingers curled slowly into a fist. She didn't say anything about the email that evening. Not while Jamie convinced Ethan to make pancakes for dinner. Not while they played a raucous game of charades that had Isabel crying with laughter when Ethan tried, and failed, to mime a flamingo. Not even when Jamie fell asleep in her lap again, his fingers clutching a corner of her scarf like a security blanket. Ethan noticed her quiet, though. He always did. They stepped onto the porch after tucking Jamie into bed. The night air was crisp with the scent of pine and the whisper of leaves beginning to fall. "You're a million miles away," he said gently. She hesitated. Then, "I got an email today, from my board." Ethan leaned against the railing, nodding slowly. "Let me guess. They want you back." "They do. Full control. Public redemption. All the perks. And I don't know," she said truthfully. Ethan didn't reply right away. Then he said, "Do you miss it?" She considered the question. "I miss parts of it, the purpose, the strategy, feeling like I could change the world with a few well-placed decisions. And now? Now I change the world by reading bedtime stories," she said with a faint smile. Ethan exhaled. "Sounds like better odds." Isabel turned to him. "But I'd be asking you both to give something up if I stayed." "We haven't asked for anything," he said. "Not even for you to stay." She looked down. "That's almost worse." He stepped closer, his voice lower. "You think we don't want you here?" "I think maybe I've started to need this more than I'm willing to admit," she whispered. "And that scares me." "Needing something isn't weakness," he said. "It's proof you're still alive." They stood in silence. Then Ethan said quietly, "If you decide to go back to that world, I won't stop you. I'll be proud of you. But I can't pretend it won't break a piece of me. And Jamie." Her eyes filled. "I know." He touched her hand, gently, reverently. "But if you stay, I want it to be because you choose us, not because you're running from something." She nodded. "I don't want to run anymore." "Then don't," he said. "Stand still. Let yourself belong." The next morning, Isabel didn't open the laptop again. Instead, she walked into town. She stopped at the cafe where everyone knew her as just Isabel, not Ms. Ward. She bought a cinnamon bun and gave the barista a drawing Jamie had made for the tip jar. Then she walked to the library where she sat in the children's section and read aloud to a group of toddlers for an hour, just because she could. When she got back, she found Ethan in the garage, wiping grease from his hands. Jamie was beside him, holding a wrench like a wand. She walked right up to them and said, "I'd like to turn the garage into a library on weekends." Ethan blinked. "You want to what?" "Just part of it. For now. Books, beanbags, a reading nook for the kids." He grinned slowly. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Jamie bounced. "Will there be hot cocoa?" Isabel nodded. "And cookies, the kind with too many chocolate chips." Jamie let out a whoop. Ethan leaned close, voice warm. "Does this mean you're not going back?" Isabel smiled. "I'm not going back anywhere. I'm going forward. Here." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "Welcome home." That night, she finally replied to Carla's email with a single sentence. "Tell the board to find someone else. I already have everything I need." She closed the laptop, shut it gently, and tucked it into the back of the closet, right beside the scarf Jamie had once said made her look like a superhero. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like she had to be one. By the time November rolled around, the garage looked nothing like it had 2 months earlier. The blackened roof from the fire had been fully replaced, thanks to Ethan's grit and Isabel's not-so-subtle insistence on hiring a proper roofer. The inside had been reorganized too, one half still humming with oil changes and tire rotations, the other slowly transforming into what Jamie had dubbed the Little Book Nook. They hadn't officially opened it yet. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony or grand announcement. But children were already dropping by on Saturday mornings to sprawl on the old carpet squares and listen to Isabel read stories about dragons, astronauts, or sometimes, by Jamie's demand, talking marshmallows who went on adventures. Ethan watched it all unfold with a quiet kind of awe. He never said it out loud, but there was something sacred about the way Isabel moved through this space now. She was no longer a visitor. She brought muffins without fanfare, folded Jamie's laundry without asking, and sometimes hummed while sweeping up dirt like she'd been doing it for years. That morning he found her out back, standing in the middle of the garden. Frost had come early this year. The vines were curling in on themselves, their season nearly done. Isabel held a watering can like it was a chalice, even though the ground was too cold now to drink. Ethan stepped up beside her. "Might be time to say goodbye to the tomatoes." She nodded. "I always hate the end of a growing season. Feels like letting go of something you worked too hard to lose. They'll come back next spring. Not these exact ones. No, he said, but maybe something better. She looked at him, eyes soft, hair pulled back beneath a knitted cap Jamie had insisted she wear. You're not just talking about plants, are you? Ethan shrugged. Maybe not. They stood in the silence together, shoulder to shoulder. The kind of silence that speaks more than words ever could. That evening, they sat on the front porch, a blanket draped across their laps and mugs of cocoa nestled between their hands. Jamie lay curled in the rocking chair, snoring lightly with a book still open across his chest. The porch creaked gently beneath them. He's growing up fast, Isabel whispered. Ethan nodded. Too fast. Sometimes I still look for the baby monitor. Sometimes I still look for my old life. He turned to her. She smiled. And then I remember. I traded it for this. The stars blinked above them like far-off lanterns. The porch light glowed behind them, casting a warm halo over the steps. I've been thinking, Ethan said, about the land behind the garage. It's just sitting there. Isabel sipped her cocoa. You want to expand? Not the shop, something else. She waited. I thought maybe a greenhouse. Something we could build together. A place for Jamie to keep growing things. For you to keep growing, whatever it is you've been growing in all of us. She blinked. You're serious. I've got old lumber, tools, time, and someone worth building it for. She set her mug down. Ethan. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't a ring. It wasn't even a question. It was a drawing, one Jamie had made earlier that week. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, all standing in front of a crooked greenhouse with little red tomatoes growing out the sides. Above it was a title, scrawled in purple crayon, Our Family Garden. Isabel's breath caught. I told him I was thinking about it, Ethan said, and he got to work. She stared at the drawing for a long time. Then very slowly she reached out and took his hand. I don't need papers or proposals, she said, but if you're asking if I want to build a life here, with you, with him, then yes, 1,000 times yes. They sat there in the quiet, the rocking chair gently swaying with Jamie's weight, the drawing pressed between them like a promise, and somewhere inside they both felt it. They weren't surviving anymore. They were planting roots. Later that night, after Jamie had been carried inside and tucked beneath covers, and the house had gone still, Isabel stood alone at the kitchen window. She looked out into the yard, where the moonlight lit the space behind the garage, the untouched earth Ethan had spoken of. She imagined what it would look like. Glass panels catching sunlight, rows of soil waiting for seeds, laughter bouncing off wood beams as they built it one plank at a time. And beside it, maybe someday, a table long enough for friends. A place where love could take root, not in wealth, but in weathered hands, shared meals and bedtime stories read by candlelight. Ethan stepped in behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. Greenhouses, she whispered, and finally being home. Snow arrived early that year. It came quietly in the night, frosting the rooftops of Pine Hollow in delicate lace. By morning, the ground shimmered under the soft light of December, blanketing the field's driveways and porches in white silence. Inside the little house behind the garage, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Jamie sat cross-legged in front of the tree, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he tied a red ribbon around the last handmade ornament, a crooked cardboard star that bore a glittery J at the center. Ethan stood near the fireplace, nursing a cup of coffee, watching his son with that unmistakable mixture of pride and disbelief. How had 6 years moved so fast? And Isabel knelt beside Jamie, carefully adjusting a garland of popcorn around the lower branches. She looked up at Ethan and smiled. He smiled back, the kind of smile that knew pain, had lived through storms, but still chose joy every time it was offered. Later that morning, the townspeople gathered at the garage, not for a tune-up or tire change, but for the grand opening of something they never knew they needed. The Hollow Haven Library. Children and parents trickled in, brushing snow from their coats, cheeks pink from the cold. Inside, books lined handmade shelves, beanbags circled a cozy rug, And in the corner, a small sign painted by Jamie himself read, "Stories grow here." Isabel stood by the door, greeting each child by name. She wasn't just a guest in this town anymore. She was woven into the rhythms of its quiet streets and kind eyes. Ethan watched from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth, heart full in a way that had nothing to do with mechanics. Jamie burst in from the back room, face glowing. "Miss Isabel, can I read today's story?" She knelt. "Absolutely. You're our featured reader." He beamed. She handed him the little engine that could, the one he always chose when he felt brave. As he climbed onto the stool, Isabel stood beside Ethan. "He's thriving," she whispered. "He's loved," Ethan said. "That's all kids need." She turned to him, quiet. "Sometimes, that's all grown-ups need too." He didn't answer, but took her hand gently. That night, the world softened under snow. The three of them sat by the fire. Jamie nestled between them, blanket tucked to his chin. Isabel had just finished reading the final page of The Velveteen Rabbit, her voice hushed, reverent. Jamie blinked slowly, drowsy but smiling. "Dad?" he murmured. "Yeah, buddy? Can I call her Mom now?" The room stilled. Isabel froze. Her breath caught halfway between surprise and disbelief. Ethan looked at Jamie, his eyes misted but steady. "You can call her whatever feels right." Jamie turned to her, curling closer beneath her arm. "Is that okay?" She blinked back tears. "That's more than okay." He nodded, then tucked his face into her side. "Good night, Mom." Isabel held him close, her hand resting over his heart. "Good night, sweetheart." And just like that, a name became a promise. Later, after Jamie had been carried to bed and the fire had turned to embers, Ethan and Isabel stood outside on the porch, snow still falling gently around them. The stars blinked between clouds like they too were settling in for winter. "I didn't know 10 minutes could change a life," Isabel said softly. "I didn't either," Ethan replied. She leaned against his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that day, about what would have happened if you hadn't trusted me, if I'd just watched you run off and never looked back." "I think about it too," he said. "But then I remember, you didn't look away. You looked at a tired man with grease on his hands and a kid in his arms, and you saw more than what the world sees." "I saw a family," she said, "before I even knew I needed one." They stood in the hush, snowflakes landing on the railing like small blessings. "I'm glad you came back," Ethan said. "Not just to Pine Hollow, but to yourself." Isabel nodded, her eyes bright. "I used to think strength meant building walls. Now I know it's letting people in." Ethan turned toward her, voice quiet. "Do you still feel like you're running?" "No," she whispered. "I feel like I've finally arrived." In the months that followed, the garden behind the garage thawed. The greenhouse went up slowly, each beam hammered by Ethan, each panel placed with Jamie's help, each bed lined with Isabel's handwritten signs. Hope, patience, second chances. The library grew too, expanded with donations from neighbors who believed in the power of stories. Children gathered every Saturday, not just for books, but for warmth, belonging, and the quiet joy of being seen. No one ever asked Isabel about her net worth again. They asked her for reading recommendations, for help tying shoelaces, for advice on how to love more gently. And she gave it, freely, fully, with the heart of someone who had learned that true richness doesn't come from what you hold, but from what you give. Years later, when someone asked Jamie where he came from, he would grin and say, "I'm the kid who gave a billionaire 10 minutes of his dad's trust and got a mom for life." Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like watching a child for 10 minutes, open the door to the very thing we never dared hope for: a home, a family, and a love that chooses to stay. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always so inspiring to see how far these stories travel. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue sharing more beautiful, meaningful stories like this one. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take good care.